Hey, friends. If you've been loving the conversations we have here on the All in My Head podcast, and you're looking for a way to ground your thoughts, reflect more deeply, or just make space for yourself in the chaos, I've created something for you. My very own journals are now available on Amazon. Whether it's the gratitude journal to help you focus on the good, especially on the hard days, or the Mind Unwind journal, a space to release, reset, and realign. These were made with you in mind, my thoughtful, deep feeling, always reflecting listeners. Just head to Amazon and search Gratitude, Mind Unwind Journal, or my name, Jenny Jimenez-Sullivan, or check the link in the show notes to grab your copy. It's simple, intentional, and ready to meet you wherever you are.
Please, allow me to show you something.
Welcome to the All in My Head podcast. I'm Jenny and I am your host, and you have landed here today for episode 18. And episode 18 is called Art for Justice, Transforming Communities Through Creativity with Amanda Masterpaul. And let me tell you a lot about Amanda Masterpaul because she has a lot of great things that she's involved in. Amanda is a theater of the oppressed practitioner, applied theater artist, activist, educator based out of South Carolina. With 20 plus years experience in academia, nonprofit work, and community organizing, Amanda has been dedicated to co-creating visions and solutions embedded in community well-being, radical imagination, and equity. Her passion is to nurture processes where people cultivate their creative power by repurposing experiences of injustice and stewarding them towards collective action and liberation. She has a master's in both women and gender studies and social justice and community organizing, and is currently a lecturer in the Women and Gender Studies program at Coastal Carolina University. She's received grants from Alternate Roots for community-based civic artistry projects with young people, presented on the Theater of the Oppressed at the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education, and received awards for inclusive pedagogy and teaching excellence. Throughout her career, she has organized alongside various community-centered initiatives in areas such as gender equity, anti-violence, LGBTQ plus IA equality, housing insecurity, and systemic racism. So Amanda is doing more than all of us combined.
Stop it.
And she's wonderful and amazing, but she's also my dear friend. So I want to welcome Amanda to the podcast.
Yay! I'm so happy to be here. It's good to hear from you. I'm so glad to engage in this convo with you, Jenny.
I know. It's so exciting because we met many moons ago, I'll say now, through my youngest son, who had Amanda as his professor and only raved about her every 4.5 minutes, probably. So,
likewise affection.
So I was so grateful to get to know her on a different level and have her become a good friend of mine. But I just want to get right in and talk about all the amazing things. So let's start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your journey into the intersection of art and social justice. How did that all begin for you?
Ooh, all right. Juicy start. Way to go.
Jumping right in, both feet in the deep end.
Yeah, exactly. So I was a theater undergraduate major, and I remember distinctly being in a theater history class, and my professor at the time, Dr. Terry Smith, was doing a chapter on something called Theater of the Oppressed. And I was like, this is very interesting. So as I was reading about this discipline and about this particular art form, I don't know, like something clicked kind of right away. You know how like you might read something or experience something, you're just like, that is my jam.
Absolutely.
That is my jam. And what was interesting is that even though I was an undergrad in theater, I was a director. I was a female director. I coined myself as a feminist director.
Mm-hmm.
I really loved like working already with physical storytelling and with doing things with original works. So I was already kind of in this place of experimenting with theater and kind of like the boundaries of theater, but very purposefully creating theater pieces that had meaning and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to not do fluff pieces.
Right.
I love them. I love going to see them. I love kind of,
Of course.
enjoying them. But I wanted something that felt like I was making a direct impact in the world. So
Mm-hmm.
I was very attracted to pieces that were commenting or had issues kind of like at the forefront, or were problematizing, what's happening in society, or we're making us, think about what is possible. So back to this theater history class, here I am, I'm learning about theater of the oppressed, and I'm like, this is really interesting. I want to know more. So I started doing my own research, and I ended up in my graduate program in women's and gender studies. I actually went to my first Pedagogy in Theater of the Oppressed conference.
Mm.
And there is where I met Augusto Boal himself when he was alive. It was in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It was the first time I think that actually the conference had held a conference in the South. So it was kind of like a big deal.
Right.
And I went, I got to meet him. I met his son, Julian, and I met a lot of these just incredible like artists and scholars and theater makers, right, from across the world. And then also I did a post-conference workshop with another theater educator. His name is Michael Rode.
Mm-hmm.
He is this incredible facilitator, started this theater company called Sojourn. It has branched off into doing collaborative research initiatives. And also currently he's in the like health and well-being and arts sector as well. And I remember this like post-conference workshop, and I was just like, we were creating all these crazy zany pieces and talking politics and the ways to like use our body as the vessel to articulate these socio-political ideas and concepts. And I was just riveted by it. After I graduated my undergrad, I went over to London. I was working in London, England for 3 months, and I was working in catering with all the other immigrants.
Yeah. Yep.
And when I was there, I went and saw a lot of theater. I had also become acquainted with this company called Theater Complicité when I was in my undergraduate program. And so I started doing some workshops with them and going, and I saw their performance of Measure for Measure. And I was completely captivated. I was captivated by Europeans' theater and the way that they have these very long extended rehearsal processes, and the way that they created intentionally through this mechanism of provoking and probing these this inquiry into our life, right? Like, what are we doing? What is the current moment? What do we want from our lives? So there, I just was hooked. I think I found theater as a language. Like, Theater of the Oppressed really hooked me in. It felt very tangible. It felt very concrete. So whether I was getting my graduate degree in women's and gender studies, or whether I was getting my grad degree in social justice and community organizing, Theater of the Oppressed has always kind of been at the hub. I first started teaching at Coastal. Actually, I was asked to teach applied theater. That was the first class that I taught at Coastal Carolina University. And intrinsically, so much of the curriculum built around applied theater was based in Theater of the Oppressed. It was just that's kind of where it was at. So that I think was that beautiful marriage of theatricality and expression that also had this very like socially political intent. And I loved kind of the marriage of those, and that being the intersection that I was just really jazzed about with arts and justice.
Right. So, I mean, and that's art, right? Isn't that what art and music and theater and all the things are supposed to do to you? They're like if it speaks to
Mm-hmm.
your heart. Like, I mean, I would have told you this past weekend that I'm going to be in the next Wicked because I was so sucked in by, yes, of course it was beautiful and it was beautifully done, but there were so
Yeah.
many pieces that I could resonate with. And I
Mm-hmm.
probably went through a box of tissues because it just drummed up so much emotion
Yeah.
and that personal, like it just pierced my heart in such a personal way that I could relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I can relate to better now as I'm older because I'm more in touch with my feelings and what's happened in my life and where I've been and where I'm going and how I got here and what I had to do to get here. So jokingly, I think I said that to Bennett and Autumn. I was like, oh man, that next one isn't recorded yet. Right. So maybe I'm going to get in there and try to get a part in the background somewhere. But I kid. But I mean, that's what art's supposed to do. I mean, it's supposed to speak to your heart. And so aren't
Mm-hmm.
we lucky that it spoke to you in that way? Because that leads us to the next question. I mean, like, what inspired you to use this creativity for a tool to address justice and community transformation?
Yeah. First of all, I think when I knew that it was actually possible,
Hmm.
I
Right. It
think for
was just
so
knowing.
long, yeah, like when you become informed and when you see a model and a series of techniques that are out there, right, you want to multiply them.
Hmm.
You want to share that knowledge. You want to pass it on, to the next generation. You want to expand it out. And literally, the techniques and the canon of theater of the oppressed were created with that intent to multiply,
Right.
to disseminate this methodology across like various communities, various populations across the globe.
Hmm.
I mean, it started in Brazil. It's not a US thing.
Right.
It started in Latin America, and then of course it's spread all across the world. So I would say that number one, knowing that it was even possible. But I think for me the thing is that I didn't want to seep into a place of despair and
Hmm.
hopelessness. It felt very concretely as something that I could tangibly do.
Right.
Um, and I think many of the projects, there's a spectrum of how this represents and how it can be applied and integrated.
Hmm.
So I've used theater of the oppressed in talking about the criminal justice system and what life on the outside of prison might be like and look
Right.
like for people in the rural South.
Hmm.
I've used theater of the oppressed to address and to confront and to hold the city accountable, right? And to spread awareness and
Hmm.
consciousness around a housing crisis
Right.
situation that's happening for young people in downtown Myrtle Beach, right? To not say that these are people who belong here. These are people who are part of your community. These are your
Hmm.
neighbors. This is you. This is me. And one of the beautiful things about that is that was this collaboration between the Coastal's theater department and a downtown center for unhoused and housing insecure youth called Project Lighthouse.
Hmm.
So you're taking this age group that's like aged 18 to 24, right? And you're almost getting them to look at each other in like this mirrored way of to say like, wow, if there was just a swift move of some circumstances, I would be in your shoes. You would be in
Right.
my shoes. Right. So I think there's this opportunity to actually make concrete measured change through
Hmm.
these techniques, right? Yes, it's inspiring. Yes, it motivates the heart. Yes, it speaks to your soul. And it like, because you get to have this kind of like cathartic or emotional experience, you do build up this attachment. It
Right.
humanizes people in a way that statistics can't. We can read a list of statistics.
Hmm.
We can sort of analyze and see diagnostically like how dire the situation is, but unless we're actually in the center, like in the epicenter of our emotions, we're not going to feel that tug and pull. It's not going to, and it's not going to captivate our self-interest. But
Absolutely.
what it also can do is it transforms you. I'm in the business of transformation. Like that's what I love. Like I love getting to see the light bulbs go off. I love
Right.
getting to see them take ownership of the work. I love for them to be the problem solvers. So it moves you from being like one of the most beautiful aspects around the intersection of arts and justice, I think, whether it's theater of the oppressed or whether it's other types of branches of applied theater or whether it's arts and well-being work or whatever it is in that sector, moving people from being passive observers in
Mm-hmm.
their life to being active agents and activists in their life, I think is one of the most special trajectories that we get to help orchestrate, but get to also be a part of and bear witness to. And that's, I think, kind of that transformation piece is kind of seeing this edge where you're not just naming the problem, but you're wanting to do something about the problem. And now
Right.
you actually get to be the creator. You get to be the imaginer. You get to be the visionary and actually naming the solution, naming what that anecdote to that problem is going to be. And that, I mean, that's incredible.
And I think that's so excellent and beautiful the way you explained it, because I think we as just humans in our society and broken when we see things that are happening. And you said,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't just want to sit in this place of despair. I think we all feel
Mm-hmm.
that way when we see things that are happening in our political climate and what's happening, to our community and people that we love when they're being attacked or harmed or misrepresented or just not helped. We're all in this community together. So to be able to be this agent of change and see this happening, you're kind of at the forefront and at the helm of bringing this to the community and allowing people to take that ownership in a different way so that we're all not sitting here just feeling hopeless and helpless. Like, what can we do? I mean, there's so much we can do. So,
Yeah, it reminds me, I think there was a film that I was showing in class this morning, and at the beginning of the film, it has this quote from Alice Walker, and I'm going to just sort of paraphrase it,
mhm,
right? But essentially, the premise is that the easiest way to give up your power is to think that you have no power,
mm, yeah,
you know? And
exactly.
so if I bring it back to sort of like the intersection of arts and justice or this
Mhm.
relationship with theater of the oppressed, right? It reminds you, but also illustrates and demonstrates where and how you do have power, you know,
Right,
can
exactly. And I
remind
think
you of
that
that.
that is so, I love that I've seen these young people, and I say, my son, for instance, and his girlfriend, because they went through your program and they learned from you hands on. But just even this younger generation of people that, like, I felt like I at that age was so clueless still. I still had no idea on what I could do. I didn't feel like I had power in my own life. So how could I have
Mm,
power in what was happening outside of my own life? So to see people and to see them taking the helm and making change happen is so beautiful for me. And now as a grandmother, I'm like, I just can't wait. This, like, every generation coming up is fiercer and fiercer, and they're just not going to take what I'll hone it myself, what I took as a woman, as a Latina, as an underrepresented person, and just as a daughter and a mother and an educator and all the things. I love it. Like, I just love it, and I'm just excited for. Yeah, I'm excited to kind of even just wait and see my grandkids kind of grow up and become these change makers in a different way, because they're like 5 and she knows everything. So it's and she's going to change the
well,
world
yeah.
anyway. So yeah, you have kids.
Oh, yes, yes, very
Yeah.
much so.
Yes. So, speaking on art for justice, how would you define that? But also, how does that look in practice in the community? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Um, so art for justice. There's so many, I think, different way based on probably the arts medium that you might
Hmm.
be working in and through, or what type of cultural tradition you might be working through that lens. Ultimately, as a real kind of, I think, bare bones type of definition, it's any artistic medium that is spearheading some socio-political economic
Hmm.
change and impact. And injustice, right, is representing this vision that is deeply embedded in these values around fairness, around equity, not equality,
Right.
equity. Like everybody has what they need not versus kind of like, well, if I have a pair of shoes and you have a pair of shoes, but I wear size 7 and you wear size 9,
Right.
me wearing your shoe is going to feel really hell's uncomfortable.
Right.
And you're wearing my shoe is going to really, really suck, right?
Right.
It's going to feel very painful. We both have shoes, so it's equal, but we don't have a pair of shoes that fit.
Right.
And I
Right.
just want to pass that on, that kind of metaphor, to one of my dear and beloved friends, Dr. Franklin Ellis, who would use that metaphor and analogy in sessions often. And that I thought was kind of like one of the most powerful sort of representations that I've heard. It's just simple, it's direct, it's clear, it's
It's such a great visual.
around like equity, like what does that really tangibly mean? So, justice in this place where there isn't the haves and the have-nots, where there is abundance, where there is everyone has what they need. Right? There aren't people living on the street. There aren't people who are food insecure. There aren't people who are being discriminated against because of some aspect of their identity that they can't even control. There isn't transphobia, homophobia, racism, etc. Right? So any artistic medium that is really challenging, provoking, encouraging, resisting against, and celebrating justice, that's what we're using like arts for. For me, I think that, I've really primarily used it in community spaces. So thinking about like working at this almost kind of like very hyper local level, it's been with giving young children. Like last summer was a program called Act Up, Play for Change that was sponsored through a grant with Alternate Roots. And this was really giving young people, everyone from kindergarten to 5th grade was a cohort, or from 6th to 12th grade was a different cohort, and giving young people agency to develop community agreements, to look at their own community, and to kind of create almost like an assessment around what issues or what stories are really important to them, that they want to talk about, that they feel very passionate about, and to give them a platform and give them tools through Theater of the Oppressed and applied theater to confront those issues. From the older group, from those 6th graders to 12th graders, we saw issues around their environment were really important to them, right? Like they live here at the beach, they're seeing pollution at the beach, they're seeing the impacts of plastics in the ocean, they're concerned about the ozone layer, right? They're concerned about environmental changes, this acceleration of storms that they're seeing. So that was like a very important issue that they wanted to confront and bring up. Some of the younger groups really talked a lot about bullying in their schools, right? This like kind of hyper obsession about how you're supposed to present yourself and kind of lowering and lessering someone else in order to make yourself feel better. And how do we confront bullying in this place where we're looking at it through a humane place, right? Because Theater of the Oppressed is not necessarily set up, even though we might identify who is an antagonist and who is a protagonist, it's not really meant to create this paradigm of an either or, but to give us, right, a framework where we can look at kind of all the complexities of the issues, and we can almost kind of see how we have to rehumanize the antagonist as well as the protagonist.
Absolutely.
Like there has to be kind of that understanding, and like gives us a mechanism and a way to literally confront the political climate.
Right.
And to not keep taking it, like to not just lay down and take it, to not just succumb, but to really challenge, to be in a place of your power, personally and individually, as well as collectively. So now you start seeing like other artists or other peers who are with you in a way where you're aligning with each other. So I'll go back to the project that we did with our housing insecure and unhoused young people, right? All of those students, whether they were college students at CCU or students or young people with Project Lighthouse who are living on the streets, or they're living in tent encampments, or maybe they're in some type of like transitional housing, their ultimate goal collectively was to really illustrate the everyday structures that were impacting unhoused and housing insecure people, and to
Mm-hmm.
ask the hard questions of like, what can we as a community do to tangibly change these circumstances, right?
Right.
So where do we need to reallocate resources? Where might we need to shift priorities? Where might we need to invest? Where might we need to divest? Right?
Right.
Like to really ask those questions, and how students who are directly impacting those issues, because there are also students on our campus who are food insecure, who are
Absolutely.
living paycheck to paycheck, who might even be living in their cars, and who might even be couch surfing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as though there's also this assumption that because you're going to college that you are also like exempt
Mm-hmm.
from the experiences of housing insecurity or food insecurity. So they start seeing each other's humanity, and as a result of that, they build a stronger united front, because no longer it's like just a statistic or just like, oh, over there,
Right.
like those people. It's now like, no, that's my friend. Like,
Right.
that's my neighbor. That's my community. So it locks you into deeper interest with one another, and because you're locked in that place, now you're going to fight.
Right.
You're
You're
going to do
invested in
something.
a different way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I love that. I love that. And I know that, my son and his girlfriend both spoke highly of that, and and how it impacted them when they were able to be a part of that, just how they felt about it and how they got even more kind of fired up in a different way on like, okay, we can do this. And they're both in that, realm of acting and theater, and they look at the work they want to do, the work they are doing in a very different way.
Yeah.
They definitely look at like, what is this going to, right? It's great to get up there and to be an actor and to put on a show, but what is the impact and the message that we're leaving? What kind of change can we make with our art? And I love that they were able to learn that and to come away with that from you and from.
Well, they're brilliant, and it's, again, it's like there should be no gatekeeping to any of this,
Right.
like this kind of idea. It's almost kind of comical, honestly, that theater of the oppressed is even being taught through like university places,
Right.
because it wasn't obviously created in that space. It was created really specifically as a political objection and resistance to Brazilian dictatorship.
Right.
It had a very like expressed political intent even from its
Mhm.
creation. And yet, of course, in today's climate, we're just seeing it kind of in so many different realms.
Right.
But I would say, like, in particular with like Bennett and Autumn, because one of the other processes that they were really directly involved in with alongside me was in this process around like what we call shant life, right?
Mhm.
And kind of them as artists, as creatives, having the opportunity to share with their peers, with other college students their age, right? Centered around these issues, around thinking about how are we going to confront sexual violence,
Mhm.
and or how do we have healthy relationships with one another.
Right.
So it was really them being able to use so much of like their creative like tapestry and their acting and their physical theater storytelling skills and all the things that they kind of wanted to experiment with, for them to develop these series of vignettes, these series of scenes and scenarios and pieces that kind of created like an entire arc of experience, right? That like college students could sort of see themselves reflected in, and it gave them an opportunity and a space to kind of, again, ask the hard questions like,
Right.
well, what does consent look like?
Mhm.
Is my partner texting me all the time, asking me where I am,
Mhm.
potentially problematic behavior? Is
Right.
there a power dynamic there? What would it look like, right? Like, what does it mean to have a healthy same-sex relationship
Mhm.
in a climate that is very progressively homophobic and transphobic and queerphobic,
Right.
right? So you start with those questions and that inquiry, and then you allow the artistry, you allow the people who are in the space, because
Mhm.
every single year when we did Shant Life, if it was not the same cast, it was a different type of set of priorities, a different
Right.
set of stories that came up based on who's in the room. And that's exactly what's down with Theater of the Oppressed. I'm
Right.
not going to go into a community of senior citizens, for example,
Mhm.
and maybe talk about issues that are affecting
Right.
like people who are like in their early 20s.
Right.
That's not necessarily going to be something that is like at the forefront of their stage in their life of what is important to them. Right.
Exactly.
So that's why it's kind of like so much on that hyper local level.
Mhm.
It's really who's in the room and how do you use that opportunity to explore and to experiment with
Right.
the issues and the problems that they're naming as really urgent and important to them. And then they become the problem solvers. So we're not coming into the community with folks who are housing insecure and we're saying, you need
Right.
to do this and you need to do that. And you need
Right.
to do this. They are literally speaking and naming for themselves what they see as the solutions and the
Right.
opportunities.
Right. And I
Because
love that
people
because
who are impacted know what's best for them.
right. And in particular with Shot Life, I remember sitting and watching and just, to be able to, for them to be able to give this to their student body, to see it, to see these issues represented in a different way. And I remember saying to Bennett, like, and Autumn, there was this one that they did where it was Bennett, not Bennett, it was Autumn and Zach. And there was a lot of
Oh,
physical
yeah.
dance and just the way, I mean,
Yep.
I was in tears over it, but it stirred up so much emotion of this, like this love and this love yet this abusive relationship that was going on
Yes. Yeah.
where those lines were so blurred, but it was so
Mhm.
beautifully done, and so tugged on my heart in that way that I just was like, wow, like you could see, and I could even propel myself way back to the days when I was that age, and I thought, geez, some of these relationships and people that I surrounded myself with were not healthy.
Mm.
They were not healthy. And so to
Yeah.
be able to see that these kids were seeing this and these young adults were seeing this early on in life so that they're not retrospectively looking back in life and going, oh yeah, that was not a good idea.
Right.
But it's so beautifully done. So it was such a great opportunity for them. And I know that they're so grateful for that.
Same.
Can you share a tangible moment where you witnessed someone witness this difference or this shift happen in a tangible way in someone's life or even in the community? Because you're very out there in the community, pounding the pavement.
Oh, this might sound like really like kind of silly, but I'm also like, there's so many times. How do I pick and choose?
I know it. I know.
And in what landscape? Okay, so I'll share about a Black femme student, and she had probably taken the applied theater class with me at least twice, maybe even three times, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken. Because we would also have students who would become like our affectionate, like repeat offenders,
Right.
like,
Of course. Yeah.
like where they would take the class another semester, even
Mhm.
though they weren't required to do so,
Right.
because each again semester was very different based on who's
Hmm.
in the room and what type of partnerships or collaborations we created. But this student also did a lot of community centered work with me in particular, too. So they were
Hmm.
involved in the Lighthouse Project. They were involved in some other initiatives that I was a part of and led. And I distinctly remember after they graduated and they left here, they called me. I'll get these random calls,
Hmm.
from beloved people from months and years and whatnot. We stay in close relationship. And
Right.
so they called me and they said that they were employed. They had this pretty good job, quote unquote, good job
Hmm.
at this theater company. And they were really struggling because they knew that from everything that they had been through with Theater of the Oppressed and through this work, that they were better than the job and they could name that they were in a toxic environment.
Hmm.
And they felt that if they stayed in that toxic environment, that they were being passively complicit with the toxicity.
Wow.
And so they knew also that if they left this job and left this quote unquote toxic environment, that, it was going to be harder. There was going to be
Of
more
course.
variables, right?
Hmm.
Barriers, etc. not having job security, etc. But they ended up leaving. And literally when they talked to me on the phone, they said, you were the one, and the
Mm.
work that I've done with you has given me the motivation and the knowledge and the wherewithal to leave that environment and to never accept that type of abuse or treatment.
Mm.
And when they left in their exit interview, they named. So it wasn't as though they just left the environment,
Good.
but they
Right.
also named what made them leave, why it was not a healthy environment, right?
Right.
So they're also using that opportunity, that kind of leverage point, right, to also share and say, these are the things that need to change for the people who are going to come into this environment. It's not right for
Right.
me, but I need you to know that if you are going to hire people like me, that this environment needs to be conducive. It needs to change in these ways. So I think I'll kind of use that as an example.
Wow.
I think
So
it goes
powerful.
beyond just kind of doing theater. It's about
Right.
how do you apply all of those skill sets? How do you apply all of those experiences into everyday life and existence? Like, how do
Well,
you
yeah. And I
really
think
take it to the streets?
that's so powerful and so empowering for someone who knows, obviously, this is going to bring a whole different set of struggle for them leaving
Mm-hmm.
this. But being able to say no to that and saying, and not only that, because exit interviews have been around forever and it's usually just very like, yeah, so we're going to send you a package and we're going to do this and that. But to be able, like, who cares? Who cares?
Yeah.
But to be able to name it and say, like, if you want to move forward and make this company, this organization, whatever, this job work for other people, this is what you need to do. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing. And that's such a
Yeah.
blessing to be able to
Yeah.
take that away. Well done.
Well, well done to them.
Well
right?
done to
Well
them.
done
We're
to
giving them a
them.
clap right now. Well done
Yeah.
to you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yes. Why do you think art resonates so deeply with people in movements specifically around justice?
It's fun.
Yeah,
Like, it's
absolutely.
fun. It's joyful. I think about, there's a student who has started this like artist movement
Hmm.
here, who is with an organization on campus called Chroma, and is also like a visual arts student.
Hmm.
And they and some other students created this group, what they call this artist movement, IdSync, and they did
Hmm.
this art exhibition at downtown Fresh Brew Coffee House.
Hmm.
And they had seen me a couple years earlier at a similar arts event that I do with my arts activism and justice class called Community Voices Exhibition at Fresh Brew Coffee House, where I did a Theater of the Oppressed segment. And to this day, like, it's hilarious. To this day, they're like, I love Theater of the Oppressed. It is so fun. So
So
I
good.
think in times where you feel really like down in the dumps,
Seriously.
you feel immobilized, you feel very threatened, under siege, right? You have to remind yourself of your humanity and
Mhm.
levity, and having fun, being joyful is an amazing like gateway and passageway to creativity. So I
Right.
think fun and joy is like, it's just intrinsic. I think also what it does is like it becomes a mirror to you. So it's like,
Mhm.
where do you see a mirror to yourself
Right.
through the arts? And then where do you see like a window or like a door?
Mhm.
You're like, oh, I never thought about it like that.
Right.
Or, oh, that's so exciting. Like, to get to see into like this other problem or this other thing that I might not have known existed.
Right.
Like, I remember the first year that we did the Lighthouse Project and we did dialogue sessions after the performance piece. And like, unequivocally, people would say, like, I had no idea homelessness was like, number one, even an issue in Myrtle Beach, but number
Mhm.
two, like, I had no idea how it directly impacted young people in
Right.
this way. I was like, ta-da!
Right.
You know?
Right.
I think that it illustrates things. We love the art. We don't always like funding the art. That's the
Right.
thing,
That
right?
is
We
the
have
truth.
to, if we're going to do this work and celebrate this work, we also have to think about how we fund it. We also have to think about how we like tangibly support it with our
Right.
dollars. and with space and with
Mm-hmm.
partnerships and
Mm-hmm.
all the things. But if arts was not threatening, there would be
Mm.
no political attacks that would be coming at art. There would be no, Augusto Boal was exiled from
Right.
his country, right? Artists have been exiled. Artists have been criminalized. They
Mm-hmm.
have been put in prison,
Right.
right? Like, artists are dangerous
Mm-hmm.
because we shape ideology.
Exactly.
We can impact change in these
Right.
very visceral, beautiful, lovely ways. So, to be an artist is to also be politicized, I think, in a lot of ways, especially if you're doing arts and justice work. You're
Exactly.
going to, take on being not liked,
Mm-hmm.
being ostracized,
Right. You're
being
going to ruffle
othered.
feathers. Yep.
Yeah, you're going to ruffle the feathers, just like you said, and it could potentially lead to higher, more extreme consequences. But you wouldn't put that kind of political pressure
Mm-hmm.
on the sector and in the industry if you didn't also know how impactful and important it was.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the thing is, people being able to tell their stories and to shine a light on something that is happening in their community and happening in the world. I mean, let's just be real. All these things are global issues and we're just not getting the point across. So I think, yes, like art is a change maker. And
Hmm.
yeah, I love it. I love it. And I love it even more now that I've gotten older and I've just been like, I don't care. I'm stepping into all the things that I love and doing it and hoping to make a change in a different way. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do when I grow up one day. Someday,
Same, same.
someday when I grow
One
up.
day, one day.
How do you engage communities in creative activism specifically? I know you talked a little bit about some of the things that you've done.
Yeah. So I missed the question. Can you say it one more time?
Oh yeah, sure. How do you engage communities in creative activism?
How do you engage communities in creative activism? Okay. So, a couple different approaches. Sometimes I will be approached. Like,
Mm,
sometimes it will come onto my doorstep and be like, hey, there's this community that is kind of interested and eager to know XYZ.
mhm.
Sometimes I'm kind of always looking for an opportunity. You know what I'm
I was going to
saying?
say,
Like, I'm
aren't you
always,
always like trying to scratch in
like
there? Yeah.
I'm always kind of like going somewhere and I'm like, oh, could this be a seed to something?
Hmm.
So I'm really curious. I ask questions. So, and if, yeah, so I'll seek it out, like I'm trying to think about how originally the Housing Insecure project came to be. I think it was somebody who honestly I met at an event and then we
Hmm.
struck up a conversation and I had mentioned that I was an artist, and did this Theater of the Oppressed work. They mentioned, this organization that they worked with. And then honestly, I think I put together a proposal and was like, hey, what would you think about this kind of wild kind of project and idea? And they were like,
Hmm.
yes, that would be really cool. This could be great incentivizing or this or that. Sometimes also there's places that I love or that I really enjoy, and I'll think about like, okay, how could something happen here? Like,
Right.
I'm a huge, huge supporter and lover of Fresh Brew Coffee House in downtown
Yes.
Myrtle Beach. I think Kate is the cat's pajamas. She's absolutely incredible. And she's a servant leader by like all definition,
Right.
and she sees a need, she fills a need. And so because this environment, sort of also lives at kind of the intersection of like arts and community and service,
Hmm.
I made a commitment that, like, with my arts activism and justice class, that our final project, this Community Voices exhibition, would be in partnership with Fresh Brew Coffee House. Like, there could be
Love it.
other places that we could do it. We could do it
Yeah,
on campus. We could do it, some other venues around
of
town.
course.
But I really want, like, right, if I have these opportunities or if I have power of students or I have bodies in the
Hmm.
space, I really want to be able to kind of leverage those like community collaborations, and so that's one. And then sometimes it'll just like pop up like a dream. Like pre-COVID, I was having this vision of doing theater in libraries for like no joke, like 2 years.
Wow.
It was just like this thing that I kept coming back to. And so I started building up a relationship with, the director of the library.
Mm-hmm.
And then we built up kind of like a kinship, and she got to know more about me and I got to know more about her. And then it was like, hey, what do you think about this kind of
Right.
idea of this project of doing like applied theater for young people? Like, and we make it free to them to join. And we do it as a summer camp, like
Right.
then it just sort of spiraled from there. So I think sometimes it's just being curious, developing relationships in the community,
Mm-hmm.
kind of seeing like what opportunities might arise, just kind of like really being conscious and listening,
Mm-hmm.
and being in the community and kind of seeing what might arise from that.
Yeah, I know that Bennett definitely took that from you, and he's always like looking to make a connection in some way. And that
Aw.
connection may lead to something bigger and better. And he's connected me with people that have helped me with this podcast and even with, the book that I'm working on and, kind of
Nice.
self-publishing that. But then now I'm doing that, right? I'm out here at
Mm,
last week or the week before, I think it was, that I'm, down at the Myrtle Beach Art Museum for the poetry reading that was happening. And there was some coastal
lovely.
professors and some coastal students who were just, not jaw dropping with, their poetry. And right away I was like, well, let's see. We need to do more poetry out here because that's just my passion and I love it so much. And I'm like, we need more poetry out here. I'm going to go over and I'm going to talk to this professor and then I'm going to talk to that professor. And we have this Conscious Soul Fest that just happened. And how can we get that there and more kind of, not only just the speaking poetry, but also just kind of like poetry and meditation and maybe in a guided way, but also like
Yeah.
also using that as kind of like activism. Like why is there not more of this stuff happening where there's so many artists and I'm meeting so many people out in this community? So I'm over here just like with my notebook, like collecting numbers and emails and just like, hey, would you be interested in this? And thankfully everybody was like, great. They weren't like this crazy girls following us around the art museum. But yeah, and I just find it to be like, as I see it more, I'm just like, there's so many ways to be able to reach and to be able to utilize this and as a change maker. So yeah, I'm out there just annoying people.
Absolutely. Do it. Annoy
Gotta do it.
them. Get in there.
Gotta do it. They gave me
Exactly.
all their stuff and it's all works. They didn't give me fake numbers and emails, so I think it's all good. It's working.
See, solid. Solid connections.
So good. What are some challenges you faced in using art for justice and kind of, again, we talked about, just kind of being able to shine a light on things that are happening in the community. What kind of challenges have you found kind of putting this out there in this way?
Well, I sort of alluded to it earlier, but this that you are to expect opposition,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when you're in a justice and an activism space, you are trying to move the needle.
Right.
And, you're going to need to expect that there's going to be opposition in the way that you're moving the needle. So I think that knowing, and kind of expecting resistance and opposition is important. I think challenges of like navigating different spheres, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I might, for example, with the Lighthouse Project, this was also a project that was having some collaborative partnerships with city entities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how am I going to engage in relationship with city representatives while I'm also attempting through the process of this performance and this experience to also get them to be held accountable for the way
Right.
that they are contributing to the problem, right?
Exactly.
So, kind of the way that you are, I think the obstacles in the way that you have to translate,
Mm-hmm.
right, or kind of articulate certain aspects of your process and
Right.
how you might have to incentivize or kind of use persuasive communication in
Right.
a lot of ways. So, I think kind of understanding your angle, your elevator pitch, stuff like that can be challenging.
Right.
Certainly to expect opposition, especially in issues that are very polarizing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like if we're doing work around reproductive justice, right? And we are taking a position in favor of those communities who are oppressed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that entails, right, being pro-choice, right? That you are going to invite in another position that is not going to be in alignment with being
Right.
pro-choice, right? So you have to, I think those are some big challenges and obstacles. I also think funding is a real
Mm-hmm.
big challenge and obstacle. I understand that there's a whole legacy of doing much of this work for free
Mm-hmm.
and doing this work, for the benefit of community and extra and kind of on top of everything else. But what it also does, is that it's exhausting. It exhausts our time, it exhausts our resources, it
Right.
exhausts our capacity to be creative. So we have to fund it. We need people, we need entities and organizations that do have wealth, that do have capital to invest that wealth and capital
Absolutely.
in people and in organizations that are trying to move the needle, that are leveraging these values, that are
Right.
working towards these ends, trying to better people's lives, and the everyday conditions of their lives.
Exactly.
We need step up, we need entities and capital to be able to do that. So I would say that, and I think honestly, just like burnout, it's like literally theater of the oppressed. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's fun
exactly.
and
It
it's
is in
encouraging,
the
right?
name.
But you're also confronting like
Mm-hmm.
these very hard, nuanced, complicated oppressions that are affecting large groups of people
Mm-hmm.
and these like phenomenons, and you're trying to find the entry points, right? And like in the way that we can access some like genuine change.
Mm-hmm.
And so the burnout of like just the demands can
Right.
be so much, the
Absolutely.
demands of working the job to pay your bills and take care of your
Mm-hmm.
family and do all the things, and then you're supporting all the your community, and you're in it. So I think just a lot of this like concrete variables that
Mm-hmm.
nobody's going to sort of roll out the red carpet and be like, yes, let go of all of your other priorities so that you may invest in social justice.
Right. Wouldn't
So
that be
it's,
lovely?
yeah, it's always going to be, I think, this tension
Mm-hmm.
around like rest, resisting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exhaustion, self-care, community care,
Right.
right? Sometimes people are just, maybe they're in a mental health crisis and they
Mm-hmm.
cannot get into a theater game. And maybe all that the people can do that day is sit down and just like talk in a story circle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. And
Right.
that's okay. And that's what's needed, So I think like being really flexible and adaptable
Mm-hmm.
to what the situation requires of you is also
Right.
really important. But sometimes it can be a real challenge, where
Right.
you're like, well, we got this deadline to meet, you know, and who gave you that deadline? A grantor or a
Right.
funder,
Right.
and it's all connected. It can be challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So much to think about. So
That's
much
what
to
I
think
do.
about. I know, you really do. You always keep me going. What else can I be doing out there? Let's talk about what kind of shifts have you seen in public perception or in policy when it comes to these art-driven initiatives? Because that's a big thing, right? We're talking about these policies and public perception, but let's talk about that.
What's interesting is that I think I'm sort of seeing that question in two forms, like kind of
Hmm.
like pre-COVID into COVID, like like slightly post-COVID, and
Right.
now I'm kind of seeing like the other era, which is
Hmm.
like just the past year into what's going to happen the next 4 years.
Right.
So I would say like pre and post-COVID, okay, I saw policy changes specifically around like coalition building.
Hmm.
So I saw organizations that maybe were kind of like siloed off of each other were now like looking at one another and being like, oh, okay, wait, we need to be in partnership and collaborate with one
Hmm.
another. And I think that that was like a really positive change, a really positive like affirmational movement. I've also seen like in regards of public perception, I think that there's more people at the table who are like, this is a problem, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to maybe it was, I didn't even know that the problem existed. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that public perception and public consciousness around the issues have certainly, advanced and progressed. What I'm seeing kind of like in the current socio-political climate, I think that I'm at this interesting place, I think, for myself is to sort of like what the next kind of endeavor is going to be for me.
Right. Right.
Right. Um,
If your ears were burning, we
I
can
think,
talk after because your name came up in a conversation last week. And so
ooh, okay,
we can
let's
chat about
go.
that off the mic. But
Off the
yeah.
record. I would say that I'm in a little bit of a searching and kind of
Mm-hmm.
seeing what most needs to pull for me. So one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that I'm going to be starting with Kate at Fresh Brew Coffee House actually is this like once a month act up play for change for community type of workshop.
Mm.
And I'm sort of kind of really interested right now, particularly in like arts for well-being
Right.
and arts for empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that there might be these spaces that are being built currently that aren't necessarily going to directly impact policy, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, but are going to need to be safe and sacred spaces for people to feel whole and well and to
Right.
be cared for, because it feels so dark and so
Yes.
tragic
Mm-hmm.
um, for many of our people in our communities. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that my focus is going to be more in potentially like space holder in that kind of way,
Right.
as a way. And then I think also, I don't know if I'm seeing Theater of the Oppressed so much as the way to work into direct action.
Mm-hmm.
Now, much of my thesis work in my grad program was about looking at literally merging social justice with Theater of the Oppressed, because
Right.
honestly, they're kind of two separate lanes that could be one in their own. There's
Mm-hmm.
not, oftentimes it's really difficult, and there's not many models, I would say, particularly in the US,
Mm-hmm.
aside from a few entities like Theater of the Oppressed NYC. Like they are doing it. Like
Right.
they are definitely really in a space of leveraging, right, community and collective power towards social justice through the
Right.
work that they do, and all just incredible organizing
Well,
tools.
it's such a theater-based state, isn't it? It's such a community that lifts
Yeah,
up, where
it
this is why I was
is.
saying we don't see that as much here, and I feel like art needs to be just so much more a part of our community because there's so
Totally,
many amazing artists, in
totally,
all
totally.
capacities. Yeah.
So there's not, I would say that aside from maybe that organization and probably other like entities across the country, right,
Hmm.
that are really marrying like social justice and grassroots organizing with Theater of the Oppressed, they
Right.
can be very much like disparate approaches, right, or kind of models.
Hmm.
So pre COVID into COVID, I was very much centered personally on my work of like, how do we move the needle in public policy? Like,
Hmm.
how do we move the needle, right, in the reallocation of resources, in capital, and in investment in like eradicating housing insecurity for 18 to 24-year olds.
Hmm.
And so I saw some fruits of that labor, you know, and ultimately, what I also saw was, hey, these nonprofit organizations are still here. They're still doing their thing. We can't really get rid of homelessness. We can't really address, sort of the housing crisis with high rental rates and,
Right.
very, very high eviction rates. You know,
Right.
um, we're just going to have to keep moving forward.
Hmm.
So I think it's an interesting question because I can kind of see both and kind of hold both. But honestly, I'm just sort of in a space where I need to kind of listen and maybe take a step
Hmm.
back and kind of see like what maybe needs me right here, right now.
Right.
If that
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that that has kind of led to like one of the questions I was going to ask you towards the end, but we're kind of at the end anyway. In what do you see, your work being or becoming? So I think that that has touched on that. And I think that, saying that you need to be more of a space holder and a safe space for people within the community is beautiful, because I think even with this podcast, it turned into something very different for me this year, where I was
Mm,
like, there's so many amazing people doing amazing things and bigger topics and bigger things that I want to talk about that maybe I don't have the knowledge about, but I may be passionate about the work. That I wanted to use this more of a showcase for that, and being able to
mm,
kind of bring on guests who are doing that work, who are out there in the community, and talk about what they're doing to make these changes.
yeah.
So I'm so grateful that you were
Oh.
one of the guests to be able to talk about what's happening in our community directly right here in the Myrtle Beach area.
Well, thank you
Um,
so much for thinking of me.
of
And,
course,
it's been a joy. I feel very much a part of your extended fam, with you and
you
I
are.
building a friendship and a kinship, and just the fact that I've been so blessed to be able to have worked and been incredibly creatively satisfied and inspired by your son, and by
Oh,
Autumn. Um, just two people that are really like near and dear to my heart. So,
yeah.
you
I
did
mean,
good. You did good on these people. Okay.
they're not too shabby, right? I think I'm going to keep them for sure. And,
Yeah, I would
no,
say.
they definitely talk about you and the impact that you made, and just, bringing that kind of mind shift for them and how they want to proceed with their art, and being artists out in their
Mhm,
community. So it's beautiful to see and to watch. But, as we're coming to the end,
mhm.
that's kind of the perfect segue to what advice would you give to artists who want to use their craft for justice, but don't know where to start?
Ooh, yeah. So, I would say fill a need, beat the need. So
Mm,
don't make yourself expendable. Like I talk to so many folks. Like I again, it's like part of the business of being in transformation
right.
is for you to understand and like to sit in your brilliance and your power, right? And not to say kind of like, well, I've never done anything like that before.
Hmm.
Like start up a conversation at your life. If you're interested in like books, maybe
Hmm.
you go to your local library and you're like, hey, where is like the queer book club? Where is like the stories for queer people?
Right.
Like I'm young, like I want to have access to that. Strike up a conversation with one of the administrators or one of the folks like working at the library, get to know about them,
Hmm.
and then stir up this conversation and say like, hey, I'm noticing this gap, I'm noticing this void, and I'm really interested. I would love to potentially offer a workshop. Like
Right.
I would love to, bring in a play that I know of that centers queer stories or queer voices,
Hmm.
and like, could I hold a reading group? The relationship I think is just to kind of be bold,
Right.
be courageous, be adventurous, be the one who isn't necessarily waiting for the opportunity to be passed down to you,
Right.
but to be the one who is like allowing your own imagination to be like, I've been interested in this. This has been itching at me.
Hmm.
I want to move forward with this.
Right.
Seek out mentors, seek out people. I have hired and rehired students like for all types of stuff. Like
Right.
I've had lovely students who did the Imagineering labs with me. They were my
Hmm.
teaching artists, for the collaboration that we did with the Boys and Girls Club around literacy,
Right.
and using applied theater to like raise literacy rates,
Hmm.
like theater for young audiences. I've had students do that, like it's just so if you're building relationships with people, opportunities might present itself. But I would just say, like, allow yourself to just be imaginative and to go for it,
Right.
like just go for it. Like what's the worst that can happen? They say no, you know
Exactly.
like that's the
Exactly.
worst, that's the worst. And if you're going to be in any line of work, you build up some sort of healthy relationship with rejection. Like rejection is just part of life.
Yeah.
But again, it's just that opportunity for you to curate those opportunities yourself.
Right.
Not to necessarily wait for the system to do that.
Right.
We're trying to change the system. The system is not going to say like, hey, I'm going to give you these opportunities to try and change me.
Right.
They're going to, you have to kind of come up with and sort of see the gaps and the voids and be bold and making the ask,
Yeah. Be bold. That is the big one. So anyone out there listening, artists, be bold. Amanda said it. I said it. Be bold.
Be bold. Yes.
I'm bold, so that's not a problem for me.
There you go.
So let's end on this note, I think. How can listeners support your work or get involved in Art for Justice, in our community locally? Or, how can listeners support your work?
Ooh, that's a good one. I wasn't prepared for that
Myrtle
one.
Beach.
I like that.
People, we're calling on you.
Well, my Venmo is no. I'm just kidding.
Same. If we're dropping Venmos,
I know, right? I would say that where there is art happening, go to it. Like, go and support it. Whether it's through the university, whether it's through community-centered places, like, please, please, please attend, with your presence. Protect it.
Right.
Invest in it if you can. So going is really important. Showing up. I want to really give like a plug to Fresh Brewed Coffee House. I think, if you are in and around the Myrtle Beach area, or if you're interested, like, please look them up. Just want to support them. Get some training, get some political education, the Center for Artistic Activism, look up some Theater of the Oppressed groups, go to the Pedagogy and Theater of the Oppressed conference. Any of you folks who are really interested, in learning about Theater of the Oppressed, I'd really encourage you to attend a Pedagogy and Theater of the Oppressed conference. I'm actually a board member for that organization. I'd love to welcome you into the family of that organization, to plug you in with just some incredible, incredible people doing fascinating work across the globe. This year's conference is actually going to be in the beginning of June. It's going to be held in Omaha, Nebraska. So that's just, a lovely plug for that organization. Look them up. And if you could join us in Omaha, I'd love to see you. So I think that those are probably some concrete ways, I think, right now.
Yeah. I think that's great. And again, like I said, local people, Myrtle Beach people, check out Fresh Brewed Coffee House and see what they're doing and how you can get involved. I know I'm getting more involved in it and with them and trying to help in any way that I can. But also I have this feeling, and we've talked about dreams and things, and again, we'll talk a little bit more off the mic about it, but I have this feeling we're just going to be seeing and hearing more from Amanda out there in the community. So get ready, guys. I think she's coming our way. I don't know. Some good stuff, some good vibes. But yeah, because we're just making stuff happen. We're not waiting for people. We're just going to make it happen.
That's right. That's what you got to do.
These destinies happen. So again, Amanda Masterpaul, I want to thank you for being a guest on my podcast, but also for being, like you said, just a dear friend and part of our family. I think we're just family now. That's how it is. Family, right? With an R.
Family. That's good.
Family.
I like that.
That's what we're going to be, because friends are, our chosen family. So
totally.
It's wonderful. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much
Of
for offering up the
course.
space.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, anytime. And I'm sure there's going to be more to come because, like I said, I feel like this is just the beginning of bigger things to come with Amanda. So, you can find her on Instagram. And I'm
Mhm.
sure, like I said, with Fresh Brewed Coffee House, look them up for events that are coming up in the local Myrtle Beach area community. And I want to thank you all for listening today to the All in My Head podcast. I hope you have the best and most beautiful day.
Yes. Bye.
Let's go.
Listen to the All in My Head podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you get your podcasts.